Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Elysium from Space Cowboys. This is, what's the best way to describe it? I guess a set collection card drafting game. You are, I believe the blurb says you're a demigod who is trying to gain the favor of the Greek gods so that you may rise in status and become a god yourself. And you have to do this by making sacrifices of your followers to Elysium, which is like the Greek afterlife where heroes go. Now, mechanically speaking, like I said, this is a set collection game, so you're going to be trying to gain cards that have that belong to each of the different like godly families, Zeus and Ares and Apollo and so on, and then try to make legends, which are the sets of cards that are going to gain you points. But there's a bit more to it than that. I mentioned card drafting as well, and how that whole system works is pretty innovative. Let me go ahead and give you a brief, well, not a brief look, a pretty exhaustive look, I couldn't help myself, of how this game is going to work, and then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think. Alright, this is a starting setup for 4 players in Elysium. The goal of Elysium is to have the most victory points by the end of 5 rounds of play. Now, every player is going to get it's a player board that you combine from 2 separate pieces, and you're going to get one of these columns in each of the 4 different colors. You're also going to start off with $4, and you're going to start off with a variable amount of victory points, because the other thing that you start off doing is you randomly determine who gets this first player marker, and then the other players get them in clockwise order starting from that player, the 2, the 3, and the 4. And then you get an amount of victory points equal to whatever your number is on your player order marker. That's because it is very advantageous to go first in a round, and disadvantageous to go last, so therefore the last player gets 4 victory points, the first player is going to get 1. It just sort of makes up for that, but this is the only time in the game where you determine things that way and distribute victory points that way. Now, it's kind of tough, the limitations of my camera and the amount of space that I want to shoot on to show this, but it's very important in your player area that you leave space above your player board and then below. Because anytime that you take a card in this game, it's going to go into your domain, which is the area above your player board. This is very important because cards in your domain are not going to be worth any points at the end of the game, but during the course of the game, that is the only place where you can use their special abilities. Once they go down below, get transferred below your player board, they go into the Elysium, and in the Elysium, they are worth points at the end of the game, potentially. I'll get to all of this, but they do lose all their special powers, so it's very, very important that you keep those 2 things delineated. Now, going back to the rest of the setup, let me focus in up here for a bit. I forget the proper name for this whole board over here, but you have the round marker, obviously. Up here, this section of the little structure here flips to one side or the other. You just determine what side you want to use at the start of the game. It doesn't really matter. It's just that the colors go in reverse order. That is, I'll get to that in a minute, but it has to do with these quest cards. Each quest card is going to be directly underneath one of those different colored symbols. This is for a 4-player game. If you're playing with 2 players, you actually have 2 special quest tiles that you use instead. I'm not going to bother to show those here. But it is notable, and I'll get back to this later, that if you, on the other side of each of these quest boards, you have the same incomplete quest tile with the same stats on it. Now over here to the side, you have stocks of victory points in gold. You also have these trigger rings. Trigger rings are going to be used for special one-time use card abilities. They're just like a little reminder of that fact. Then over here to the side, you have these bonus point tokens. Now there are 3 point tokens. These here, we call these the longest road or longest mile tokens because it's kind of works similar to settlers. I'll get back to that in a minute. And these will be in every game, a 1, a 2, and a 3 with different victory points values on them, 3, 6, and 9. Over here though, we call these the family bonus tokens, and you're only going to use the family bonus tokens for the god cards that you are using in your particular game. So in this particular game, I have set it up so that I have Poseidon, Zeus, Athena, Hades, and I always forget this, Mercury or Hermes. Yeah, Hermes. I'll get back to how you would actually claim these when I get into the actual turn-by-turn game mechanisms. So you're going to have your deck of cards, and how you're going to set this up at the beginning of the game. There are different decks of family cards. They're called family cards. I call them god cards, whatever. They're the same thing. There's 8 different decks, and I'm going to, at the end of the overview, or near the end of it, I'm going to go into what those different decks do and what they mean. But what you're going to do is you're going to take 5 of those decks to decide however you want which 5 you're going to choose, shuffle them all together, and then at the beginning of the game and then at the start of every future round, you're going to have 13 cards for a 4-player game out in what's called the Agora. Now that number is determined by the number of players, so I think the equation is 1 plus 3 times the number of players. Consequently, for a 3-player game, you're going to have 10 cards and so on. So you get less cards as you have less players. It's also important to note that on future rounds, if there's any cards left over in the Agora at the beginning of the round, you clear those out into the discard pile, then you put 13 new ones out. So once you have all that setup figured out, I'm just going to go through the general guidelines of how to play the game turn by turn, and then I'll come back and explain the different special abilities and how all the different god cards interact. So the first thing you do is the card cleanup, which you don't have to do on the first round. Then you go into the action phase. The action phase is where you are either taking a card from the Agora or taking one of the quest tiles or quest cards, whatever you want to call them. And you're going to go around 4 times, and that corresponds to the number of columns you have. Because, I hate to put it this way, but the columns are a type of currency? Not really, but they're kind of a prerequisite of a thing that you use in order to get those cards or the quest tile. And the end result is that you are going to get no more than 3 cards, unless there's some sort of special ability, and 1 quest tile. You may end up with less than that amount of cards, but you will always end up with a quest tile at least. And then when it's gone around 4 times in turn order based off of your tokens, then you're going to move on to the next phase. Now I'll explain taking a quest token very simply, or let me explain the whole concept of the columns first. That's probably the more important thing. The columns, while they're on your player board, they're in play, and they are sort of a prerequisite, something that you need to fulfill the prerequisites of the cards and the quest tile that you want. So long as you have each color there, if there's any card or quest tile that requires that color, you are able to take it. But after you've taken a card or a quest tile, you must sacrifice one of your columns. It doesn't have to be the one that was necessary for you to take that card. For example, this card, one of the Zeus cards, requires, well, let me focus in a bit. It requires that I have one of the blue columns, okay? That is a requirement. So long as I have that blue column on my player board, I can take this card, but then I can sacrifice and take off of my player board any column that I want, including the blue one, if I wanted to do so. Now, some of them are a bit different. This card that has 1 colored symbol and then a black symbol requires that I have at least 2 columns on my board, and one of them must be yellow. The other one can be whatever I want, but I must have at least those 2. I don't happen to have one. Oh, here's an example. This one is an example of one that's more specific than that, the Medusa card. This requires that I have both a red and a yellow on my board. Now, even though this card and this card has 2 different symbols, that does not mean I'm spending 2 columns or sacrificing 2 columns. I am still only sacrificing 1 column no matter what. I just have to have these prerequisite columns on my board. I find that's a very simple concept, but that it's still easy for people, or difficult for people to wrap their head around at first. Now, I'll take this opportunity, even though I'm not going to go into all the nuts and bolts of the different special abilities, to tell you about just the breakdown of the card and what some of the symbols mean to you. The number up in the top corner is the level of the card. There's a few different reasons this is important, because whenever you want to transfer a card to your Elysium, it's going to cost you that much in gold, the level of the card. But also this is important for when you make your Legends, which is the set collection part of the game. We'll get to all that. Here's the prerequisite, the acquisition cost. This reminds you, this in the color in the background, the symbol here in the color reminds you what family this card is from. Then down here you'll have a different special ability. I'll get to this in a bit when I talk about the different family cards at length. But here is the special power of the card. This is where the iconography of the game comes in. This is essentially the tap symbol, although they're legally obligated not to call it the tap symbol, which means that you can tap this card. Any special ability, by the way, is only usable on your turn, but you can tap this card to expend it, use its ability, and then you don't get it back until next round of play. Whereas, I mentioned before the trigger rings, when you take a card with the trigger ring, you put one of those rings on this card, and that is a one-time use only for the rest of the game's special ability. When you want to use it, get rid of the ring on your turn. Some of the cards are instantaneous, which means if I purchase this card, this effect, which makes all the other players lose a victory point and a coin, happens immediately, and then this card sits there like a big fat lump. Let's see, another example. We have these cards with the liar on it. These are only, because notice how it's a different color, these are only usable in the next phase of the game, the Legends phase. These cards, the Chronos cards, are final scoring cards, meaning that they, first off, they have to be in your Elysium for them to count. They're the only card that actually gets a special ability while they're in your Elysium, and they must be in a legend in your Elysium, and they will give you some sort of special scoring at the end of the game. Like this one gives you a victory point for each Poseidon card that is in the legend that it's in. I know that makes no sense right now, but it will. And the last two cards, I actually don't have them out in the display, or last two symbols, I should say. This infinity loop is a permanent symbol. The reason why it's purple is because this happens always. This will happen in any phase of the game. It's just an always-on power whenever it applies. Then you have the Elysium symbol. And the Elysium symbol usually is accompanied, or always is accompanied, by a smaller basic action symbol, the things I've just described. What this means is that you cannot use this power, which in this case is a tap power, unless you have any other card in your domain, your top area, that has the Elysium symbol. It pairs up with another Elysium symbol card. And so long as you have at least one other card with that symbol, you can use its ability and you can use the other Elysium symbol card's ability. Now, it may come to pass that, remember, you're going around 4 times trying to get 3 cards and a quest tile, and you will always take, let me clarify one thing I said at the beginning. You may not get 3 of these cards, but you will take 3 cards total. Because if you ever find yourself locked out from getting a card that's in the Agora, meaning like you spent the wrong types of columns, and now it's like, oh crap, I only have a blue and none of the cards that are left over are blue, then you are forced to take a citizen. Remember how I explained that? You take the cop card off the deck, put it into your domain, now you have a citizen, and I'll get to why those can be important or can potentially be bad as well. But the end result is that you will have 3 cards in your domain, whether they're citizens or not. Now, the last thing you can do, that you must do on your turn, is take one of the quest tokens. And I mentioned before, these quest tokens, tiles, cards, whatever you want to call them, line up to the same different column symbols. In order to take the applicable symbol quest card, you have to have one of those columns left, and then on your turn you spend your action to take that instead of getting one of the cards. And I'll get back to what all this on the bottom is in a minute, but the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is that this is turn order. So on the next round of play, and actually even slightly before the next round of play, you will adjust the turn order to whatever tiles people have taken and redistribute these tokens around applicably. Now, much like with the Agora cards, it is possible that you will not be able to take one of the quest tokens because you've locked yourself out of it. You left yourself only so many columns, and other players took the cards that you were able to get with those columns, and now you can't get any of them. Well, you will be taking one no matter what, but you're going to take it as an incomplete quest. And in fact, not only is this worse than the other quests for resources when you get to the next phase of the game, it guarantees that you will go last. No matter what, you are going to take the 4th player token for the next round. Alright, so after that phase is all done, every player gets one way or the other, they get some cards and their quest tile. Now it is time for the Legends phase. This has to do with transferring cards down into your Elysium, determining the player order as I just described, and also getting rewards from your quest tokens. So that will actually be the first thing that you do, determine your new player order, because that's actually very relevant for what's coming next. And then, depending on which quest tile you took, you're going to get rewards. Now, some of this is very simple. You get 3 coins here. A couple of them have victory points, so you'll take those victory points right away. But you might be asking, well, what are those liar symbols? Well, the liar symbols are the number of transfers you get per round. Transfers from your domain, or per this phase. Transfers from your domain to your Elysium, which is very important for the end game scoring. So once you've done the turn order and gotten your resources, in the new turn order, and that's why this is relevant to do now, in the new turn order, every player takes turns doing all of their transfers at once, or however many of their transfers they have coming to them. You're not required to do all of them. When you want to transfer a card to your Elysium, you pay whatever gold amounts is the level of the card. So if I want to transfer this card here, I have to pay 2 gold back to the bank. That's how much it costs to transfer it. Remember, you have a limit of how many transfers you're allowed to do. What you're trying to do by transferring cards to your Elysium is building legends. There's 2 ways to build a legend. One of them is to make an entire family of 3 cards of the same family in 1, 2, and 3. So if I had these 3 Zeus cards, I could make a family. There would be a maximum of 3 cards. They all have to be of the same color. You could start it in any order that you want. You can grab a 2 first, then a 1, then a 3, but it is not complete until you have a 1, 2, or 3. And at the end of the game, any single card in your Elysium is worth nothing. You just discard it. You have to have at least 2 cards in any legend for it to start getting you points. And there's a little score tracker that tells you how many points you're going to get for all the different things. I'll get back to that later in the game. Now, the thing about the family tokens is this is where these bonus tokens come into play. The first person to complete a set of 3 cards in that, or in a 1, 2, or 3 family legend is going to take the first 5-point tile, bonus tile for that family. The second person to do it, which could be the same player, by the way, is going to take the 2-point, and then after that, nobody gets anything. The second way to build a legend is with numbers. This is where you have up to 5 cards of the same number, but all of different families. So actually, let's see, all 2s. So there's a 2 from Hades, a 2 from Poseidon, a 2 from Hermes, a 2 from Zeus, and let's see, there we go, 2 from, I don't know. Here, we'll use, I just destroyed the entire world. Where'd you get it? You can go up to 5 cards with the same number of cards as long as they're from different families. Now, just like with the family tokens, this is where you're eligible for what I like to call the longest road tokens. Every time that you get to 2 of the same number, you're eligible to take one of the tokens. So let's say, for instance, as soon as I put down my second 2 in a legend, if I'm the first player to have done that, then I get to take the bonus tile that corresponds to the level 2 cards, which is going to be worth 6 points. However, as soon as another player makes a set of 2s that has 3 cards in it, then he's going to take that token from me, and you can get up to a maximum of 5. And the first person to get to 5 cards is just going to take it, and they'll hold on to it for the rest of the game because a tie is not good enough to take that token. And it works the same way with the level 1 and the level 3 bonus tile. Now also, I mentioned Chronos cards before. Chronos cards must be in a legend in order for you to score their end game points. So that's something to keep in mind. And let's talk about the citizen cards. If you have a citizen card, you can transfer it down, and it's essentially a wild card. It can slide into whatever legend you want and take that card's spot. So if I needed it to be by a certain color of 2, I could put it there, and the amount of gold you have to pay for that transfer is equal to whatever spot it's taking up. So if I put it as one of the 2s, I have to pay 2 gold because it essentially counts as a level 2. If I needed to go into this legend to complete my family legend, then I need to pay 1 because I needed a 1 to be there. The bad side about this, even though it's great to have wild cards, is that at the end of the game you have to lose 2 victory points for every citizen that's in your Elysium. And the number of points you get for these, by the way, is drastically different because for the numbered cards, you get much, much more. If you're able to get up to 5 of the same number in different families in the same legend, you get 12 points, whereas just from having a set of family legends, you're only going to get 6 points. Once everyone's had a chance to transfer and start or complete Legends, then you go to the end of Epoch phase, which is where you just clean everything up and get ready for the next round. Move the marker up. Everyone's got their new player order. You're going to go to the start of the next phase, clear out any cards that are still here, put out however many cards you need for the number of players, and then do it all over again. And you're going to do this 5 times. Now, if you get to the end of the 5th round, then it's time for end game scoring. You're going to add up all the points you're going to get for the different sets of cards that you have in your Elysium, the sets of family cards, the sets of numbered legends, and then get all those points, add them up together with your Chronos points, any victory points that you gain during the course of the game that you put onto your player board, you're going to add up. And there's a couple other ways to score points, which I haven't really explained yet, that have to do with specific gods. But that's the general gist of the game. You're trying to collect as many cards as possible for the sets of Elysium cards that you want in order to get the most points, and using their special abilities wisely while they're still in your domain. Now, let me show you some of the individual god cards and how they interact. Now, just real quick, every god deck has some iterations of cards that are the same. They're just themed to that particular god. So, for instance, Tribute to the Amazons here says that you get a gold every time that you transfer or acquire an Ares card. And there's going to be one of these for every one of the decks. There's also one for victory points that does the same thing. So, for instance, this one says every time you take or transfer a Poseidon card, you get a victory point. Some of them has to do with the legends. So this one here says that you get a victory point for every Zeus card in this legend. This is one of the Chronos cards, which means that when you put this into a legend, you get those points at the end of the game, which means you definitely want to put this into a family legend for Zeus, so you'll get 3 points for it. Whereas this one, you want to have different families in a numbered legend. That would be the best place to have it. So if you, for every different family you have in this legend, you get an additional victory point. Just to show you some of the general cards for each of the different decks, every deck is themed a little bit different. Poseidon is all about screw you. He's all about things that are going to harm the other players. So Medusa's one-time ability is that you choose 2 cards at the other for each player, and each player has to discard one of those cards. The Cyclops, all other players choose to discard either 1 card from their domain or 2 gold. What's his name? Aeneas, he has a one-time trigger ability. You choose a level, and each player has to get rid of a card of that level. Earthquake, all other players discard all the citizens in their domain. Zeus cards are all about victory points. So the Angels of Zeus gives you a victory point during every legend phase, so long as it still is in your domain. As a one-time ability for Triumph, you receive a victory point for each set of 2 cards that are in your domain. This is the Trial of Heroes. You can tap this card and discard a card from your domain to get 2 victory points. Heracles, one-time trigger ability. You get a victory point for every 3 victory points on your player board. Hades cards are all about transferring cards. They give you free transfers. They give you transfers as a special ability. That's an Lucius card. This one gives you 2 victory points every time you transfer 2 cards during the Legends phase. Persephone gives you a free transfer. You get to transfer 1 card completely for free. Otherwise, you still have to pay. Cerberus lets you discard a card in order to transfer a card. Hephaestus is all about money. This card gives you is an equalizer, where you get money equal to whoever has the most money. This card lets you convert money into victory points. Slaves, which I'm sure is going to rile up a lot of people on Board Game Geek, lets you discard a card in order to get from your domain in order to get $2. And this one gives you tap the card to get $1 for every Hephaestus card in your domain. Athena's cards always have 2 abilities. One ability that you do, and then another weaker version of that ability that the other players do. So, Oath of Hospitality here lets you discard a card and then immediately draw a card and add it to your domain, whereas every other player can do that as well, but they have to pay an additional gold for it. Divine Law lets you draw a card and take it face up into your domain and then transfer a card. The other players can choose one or the other. Embassy gives you 1 coin and 1 victory point for every Athena card in your domain. All the other players do the same thing, but they choose only gold or victory points. And here's an Lucius card, Initiation. You get 2 points when you tap this, or 2 coins when you tap this card. Every other player with an Lucius card in their domain gets 1. Hermes cards are all about redoing abilities and just trickery. So Psychopomp here lets you, as a one-time use, you can use the trigger ability or one-time instant ability of a card in your Elysium. Orpheus lets you swap one card from your domain with a citizen from your Elysium. The Trickster lets you swap a column you have not expended yet for a column that you have expended on your player board. And the Messenger, if you have at least one citizen in your domain, you can use the instantaneous power of a card in your domain by tapping this card. Now, there are two other gods that I have not detailed because they kind of break the rules in much more drastic ways. First, you have Ares, and when you play with Ares, you need to play with these prestige point markers. At the end of the game, whoever has the most prestige point markers is going to get a huge point bonus. I think it's 16 points. And then second, third, and fourth place, so long as you've collected at least one prestige point marker, are going to get a lot less points than that. I think it's like 8, 4, and 2, something like that. So all of Ares' cards, or most of them, have to deal with getting these prestige points. So Initiation here is an Lucius card. Tap it, get a prestige point. The Water Dragon is a one-time use trigger ability. Every player gives you a prestige point. Glorious Victory, you tap it and get a prestige point for each Ares card in your domain. Whereas the Go Tell Sparta makes you discard a card in order to get 2 prestige points when you tap that card. The other special god that changes the gameplay pretty fundamentally is the Apollo cards. These require you to use this Oracle board, which you'll put off to the side of your Agora at the start of the game, and you will populate it with 4 more cards from the deck, in addition to however many cards you're actually going to have out in the Agora as normal. On future rounds, if there are still cards left in the Oracle board, you're going to sweep those over into the Agora before you fill up the rest of the Agora. So they count against your limit of cards in the Agora, but then you're going to fill up the Oracle board again. So it's just like always having 4 other cards that are in play, but you can't just take them like the other cards. Instead, the Apollo cards are going to interact with them in interesting ways. So if I can show you a few of those ways, you have this card here, Prophecy of Glory, which lets you simply play it as a trigger ability, take one of the cards from the Oracle. Gathering of Heroes forces you to add 2 more cards into the Oracle, then take one of those cards from the Oracle. Initiation lets you use a trigger ability or instantaneous ability of a card from the Oracle, and it's a Lucius tap ability. And then Master of the Oracle, you discard a card from your domain to take any 2 cards from the Oracle. And the very last thing I'm going to show you, I know this has gone way, way too long, as you can tell I'm pretty into this game, is the insert, because I just thought it was worth mentioning. It's a pretty cool insert that holds everything pretty well, like all the decks of cards, and then everything, like all the little bits and pieces of the boards, fit pretty nicely in it, so I just thought I'd show you that. That is a way too long overview of Elysium. Let's get to my final thoughts. Alright, my overview went really long, so I'll try to race through these ending thoughts pretty quickly while still hitting all the major points. I always start off talking about theme and components. The theme is probably the weakest part about Elysium, which is not to say that it's bad. I like the idea that you're getting souls into your domain, and well, people into your domain, then their souls go to Elysium, and you're vying for favor of all these different gods' families. But I felt a little bit disconnected from it. It doesn't really feel, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing other than collecting cards and getting points. But that's fine. It's not really the focus of this game. I can kind of roll with that because the rest of the mechanisms are so good. Let's get back to that in a second. The components of the game are beautiful. Like, everything about the presentation of this game is just stupendous. The artwork, it's great. Like, there's 8 different god decks. Every one of them has a different artist, and every artist, I would be happy if any of them did every bit of artwork for every other board game I play from now on. They're all great. Some of them I think I probably personally like better than others, like Victor, it's either Victor or Vincent Dutrait, who I've seen in other games, who just does an amazing job, is probably the best one of them, but they're all good. The game just looks, all of the artwork on the cards looks fantastic. The components, the columns, the boards, even the insert is good. That's probably the most notable thing about the whole review, is that there's actually an insert that's good. So that, you know, everything about the presentation, just fantastic. Going on to the gameplay. Well, I won't beat around the bush. This game is fantastic. If this does not make it onto my top 10 games of 2015 list at the end of the year, that will have meant either I'm dead at that point, or, very dark, or this year will have been the best best year of gaming ever. That's the only way that this would not make it into my top 10, that there would be 10 other games better than this, because it's just great. And I was thinking about, on a base level, why I like it so much. And I've heard other people compare it to Seasons. And it's different. It's very different in a lot of ways, and I think I still like Seasons better. But the thing is, I see echoes of one in the other. You're getting cards and trying to combo them together using different special abilities with different colors and things like that. There's some similarities there, enough to get me into Elysium, but then it becomes its whole different beast at that point. And I don't even know where to start, really, but I guess we could talk about the best thing about the game, which is the variety of the God cards. The fact that you have these 8 decks, each of which functions almost completely differently. You have some common victory point cards that they all share, just different iterations of them, but then they all have a different feel and focus to them. Hephaestus wants to get gold for you and then convert that gold into victory points. Then you've got Hades, which is all about easing your ability to transfer cards, and Zeus is more about getting victory points and keeping and manipulating the cards that are in your domain still, so keeping your Zeus cards in play as long as possible. Athena gives you really great abilities, but then it gives the other players weaker versions of those good abilities. So everything feels completely different and fresh, and mixing together these different decks and getting different combos out of them with all these different combinations adds a tremendous amount of replayability and variety to the game that I just love. Now, 2 of the decks function completely differently from the rest and really drastically alter the game. And these 2 decks are the ones I've heard the most mixed reviews from in my gaming group. And by the way, just to give you an indication of how much I enjoyed this game, the first night that I played this game, I played it back to back. That never happens in my gaming group because we have so many new games coming in. I'll play like one game, immediately move on to something else, and I'll revisit the game on another game night just to keep cycling through games. I was like, you know what? I gotta play this game again right now. I gotta try those other decks, but I digress. The Apollo and Ares decks are very, very different. And I've heard people complain about the Apollo deck in my personal group. I don't know if people talk about it online this much, but that it just adds too much fiddliness and doesn't really do much. But I disagree. I like the Apollo deck. I like that you can see cards that are going to come into the Agora next round if they're still there. And there may be even more added there because of those Apollo cards that can manipulate the Oracle. And I just think it's very interesting. I think it's not necessary to play with it all the time, but it adds an interesting dynamic to the game. The Ares deck, I'm a bit on the fence with. I like the idea of it, that it's giving you another thing to race for in addition to like the family bonus tiles and what I call the longest road bonus tiles. But people rightly pointed out that chances are if you get the 16 points for having the most prestige points, you're probably going to win, or at least second place. It's just such a huge advantage. You'd really have to screw out to not win at that point. And so because people know it's so pivotal, it becomes like the new focus point for a lot of the game, taking your eyes off the rest of the mechanisms of the game, and it could just kind of consume the gameplay a bit too much. I can see that argument, and I think I agree to some degree, but I still like it. I still like what the Ares deck brings to the game, but I probably would play with it less than any of the other decks. For me personally, the only one that really annoyed me, but I'd still throw it in because it's not too big a deal, is the Poseidon deck. That's just a lot of screw you. A lot of screw you. I would probably not play with it with some of the other more aggressive decks like Ares, but it's still okay. So I love the variety of those decks. That's probably the best part of the game, but even the individual game mechanisms are fantastic. The game is really simple to learn overall. I mean, whenever I first set it up, and probably when you saw it in the overview, you're like, wow, that's a lot of cards and things. Is this really complex? No, it's not. There's a lot of information on the cards, but it's simple to get up and running. The interesting part comes in how tense the decision-making is in this game. Everything feels momentous. You only get so many cards, and you have to get the right cards in order to maximize your points as much as possible. So it's constantly nail-biting, like, oh, are they going to take that card? And if I let that card go now, is it going to still be there? And will I have the column necessary to be able to take it? And oh yeah, I got to grab a quest token, because if I don't get the right quest token now, I either won't have enough money, I won't have enough transfers, and I don't want to get stuck with an incomplete quest if I sacrifice this column now. The whole column acquisition thing is just great and just works so well. It's the hardest part of the game to explain, but once you get it, it's very simple. So every decision in the game just feels momentous, and the card special abilities is a whole other thing that adds so much variety to the game, and the Elysium symbols, trying to get those linked up together to combo off of each other, and man, I could go on and on. I would say that because of all of that, though, because of all the important momentous decision making that you have, another fault of the game is that it is highly prone to analysis paralysis. It's very hard to not fall into that trap. And sometimes it's necessary because you're sitting there, you have to read all the different cards that are out there, which is exacerbated with more players. This is probably best as a 3-player game. And so that is bad. And I will tell you that the box says 60 minutes, not a chance. If you're playing with 4 players, I know someone's going to disagree with me about this out in the audience, but if you are just even fairly new to the game, even if you played it a few times, with 4 players, no way you're finishing it in 60 minutes. It's at least a 90-minute game. But okay, you kind of go into that expecting that because it's always a lie, the time on the box. But other than that, and other than a couple of the decks being a little bit wonky, this is a fantastic game. The presentation, the set collection part I didn't even talk about, and getting the legends together, chasing after the bonus tiles, the different powers on the cards, all the important and momentous decision making. This is a fantastic game. I would encourage you to try it as soon as you can. Hopefully you'll love it as much as I do. That is Elysium from Space Cowboys. Highly recommend it.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.